Captain Carter, for the final time, I am ordering you to cease all fire suppression activities. This is a direct and lawful order.
And I am telling you, officer, that your order is unlawful. I will not obey it. Now get the hell out of my way.
The heat was a predator. It stalked the perimeter of the abandoned Red Stag Ironworks, a shimmering, invisible beast that warped the air and promised violence. It rolled off the sprawling brick warehouse in waves, turning the crisp October morning into a convection oven. Flames, a furious churning mass of incandescent orange and greasy black smoke, punched through the roof, roaring into the sky like a jet engine. The building itself seemed to be screaming, a chorus of groaning steel and shattering glass that was a symphony of destruction for Captain Ben Carter of the Northwood Fire Department. It was, in his professional opinion, a perfectly terrible Tuesday. Engine 33 lay a 5-inch supply line from the hydrant on McKinley. Carter's voice, a gravelly baritone forged in the crucible of 1,000 fires, cut through the din with effortless authority. O'Malley, Diaz, get the 2.5-inch line charged. I want a blitz attack on the Bravo side loading docks. Let's knock this beast back before it jumps the alley. At 48, Ben Carter was carved from the same granite as the city he served. He was built like an anchor, solid and immovable, with a face that was a roadmap of close calls and long nights etched under the brim of his white captain's helmet. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, missed nothing. They swept across the chaotic scene, not seeing flames, but seeing physics. He saw the fuel load of old pallets and industrial solvents, the structural weaknesses in the pre-war brickwork, and the wind direction that threatened to carry a storm of embers into the residential neighborhood a block away. This wasn't just a fire, it was a complex, lethal equation, and he was the only one on scene who knew how to solve it. His crew, Engine 33, moved with the fluid, synchronized efficiency of a team that had bled and sweat together for years. They were an extension of his will. O'Malley and Diaz, two young, strong firefighters, leaned into the bucking hose line, a roaring torrent of water exploding from the nozzle and turning to steam the instant it hit the superheated brick. Ladders were being thrown against the walls, saws were being prepped to ventilate the roof, and every action was a carefully orchestrated piece of a violent puzzle unfolding in Carter's mind. The initial report was for a minor blaze started by vagrants. Now it was a 4-alarm monster threatening to consume an entire city block. His priorities were a catechism learned by every firefighter: life safety, incident stabilization, property conservation. In that order. Always. "Captain!" The voice was sharp, laced with an unfamiliar arrogance. Carter turned, his focus momentarily pulled from the fire. A police officer was striding toward him, moving with the stiff-legged gait of someone who believed his uniform made him royalty. He was young, mid-30s at most, with a haircut that was too perfect and sunglasses that seemed permanently affixed to his face. His name tag read Riley. "This is my scene now, Captain," Officer Riley announced, not as a point of information but as a declaration of conquest. He stopped directly in Carter's path, planting his hands on his tactical belt. "I need you to pull your men back, all of them." Carter blinked, the smoke and sweat momentarily forgotten. He was sure he'd misheard. The roar of the fire was immense. "Pull them back? Son, we're in the middle of an offensive attack. We're trying to stop this thing before it—" "This is a potential arson, a felony crime scene," Riley interrupted, his jaw set. "Every gallon of water you're pouring on it is destroying evidence. I am taking command of this perimeter. I want you to kill your lines and stand by." For a long moment, Carter was utterly speechless. He stared at the officer, then back at the fire. A section of the parapet wall on the roof was glowing cherry red, a clear indicator that the steel roof trusses were about to fail. Pulling his men out was one thing. He might have to make that defensive call himself in the next few minutes. But killing the water lines? That was insane. It was an invitation for a flashover, a guarantee of a full structural collapse, and it would turn a dangerous but manageable fire into an uncontrollable conflagration. It wasn't just a bad idea, It was a potentially lethal one. "Officer," Carter began, his voice dropping into a low, dangerously calm register he reserved for life-or-death situations. "I am the incident commander of this fireground. My authority here is mandated by state law. We are engaged in active fire suppression to protect life and property. We are not shutting anything down. Your arson investigator can have whatever's left after we put the fire out. Now I have a job to do." He turned his back on Riley, a clear dismissal, and keyed his radio. "Command to Roof Division, report status on the ventilation cut." Before he could get a response, Riley stepped in front of him again, his face flushed with anger. The sunglasses were gone now, revealing eyes that were cold and unyielding. "That wasn't a request, Captain. That was a lawful order from a peace officer. I am securing a major crime scene. You are contaminating it. Shut it down now or I will place you under arrest for obstruction." The words hung in the superheated air, a challenge so profoundly absurd, so disconnected from the reality of the roaring inferno behind them, that Carter felt a surreal sense of disbelief. The greatest threat on his fireground wasn't the collapsing building or the toxic smoke. It was the man standing in front of him with a badge and a catastrophic misunderstanding of his own importance. "Obstruction?" Carter's laugh was a short, harsh bark devoid of any humor. It was the sound of a spring being coiled too tight. "Officer, the only thing being obstructed here is this fire's path to the next zip code. My crew is performing their legal duty to extinguish it." As if on cue, the fire answered for him. A deep, percussive whoomp erupted from the warehouse's upper floor as a pocket of unburned gases ignited in a backdraft. The explosion blew out a row of high windows, sending a shower of blackened glass and debris raining down onto the street. The pressure wave was a physical blow, a massive, invisible shove that staggered the firefighters on the hose line. "Command to Interior!" Carter barked into his radio, his attention instantly snapping back to the safety of his team. "Sound off!" A strained voice crackled back through the speaker. "Interior is okay, Cap. That one rattled our teeth. We're getting heavy heat pushing down on us. We need that roof opened up now." That was all Carter needed. He turned back to Riley, his expression now chiseled from granite. "We're done here. Go secure your perimeter and let us do our jobs." But Riley didn't budge. The explosion seemed to have cemented his resolve, twisting his perception of the event into further proof of his own theory. "The business that owned this place filed for bankruptcy last month," he said, his voice taking on the smug, prosecutorial tone of a TV detective. "They had a massive insurance policy. This fire starts in the middle of the day with no witnesses. You don't find that suspicious?" Carter felt a flash of pure, unadulterated rage, but he banked it down. Panic and anger were liabilities on a fireground. "What I find is a vacant building with a compromised sprinkler system, filled with flammable materials. It's a textbook fire, son. I don't have time to entertain your conspiracy theories while that roof is about to come down on my men's heads." Another firefighter, Lieutenant Miller, Carter's second-in-command, jogged up, his face grim and smeared with soot. "Cap, the Delta wall is bowing. I can see the mortar crumbling. Structural integrity is gone. We either pull everyone out and go defensive now, or we risk burying them inside." The decision was instantaneous. The risk had become unacceptable. The building was a loss. His job now was to keep the fire from claiming any more than it already had. No neighboring buildings, and certainly none of his firefighters. "All units from command. We are evacuating the structure. Evacuate the structure immediately. We are transitioning to a defensive attack," Carter announced into his radio, his voice a calm, commanding presence in the chaos. As his crews began to strategically withdraw, backing out of the smoke-choked doorways, Riley saw his imaginary crime scene being washed away. A defensive attack meant master streams, huge, powerful torrents of water from deck guns that would obliterate any subtle evidence he imagined existed. "No!" Riley's voice was sharp, nearly a shout. "I forbid it! You will not drown my evidence. The point of origin is in the main office on the first floor. I need it preserved." "Preserved for what?" Carter shot back, his patience finally shredded beyond repair. So an arson investigator can find a melted stapler after the entire building pancaked on top of it. You're not thinking, officer. He turned to Miller. Get Ladder 14's aerial platform in position. We're going to hit it with the master stream from above and create a water curtain to protect the exposures to the east. As Miller rushed to relay the orders, Riley did the unthinkable. He took 2 quick steps and physically placed himself between Carter and his lieutenant. His face was flushed, a mask of pure rage and disbelief that his authority was being so utterly disregarded. "Captain Carter," he said, enunciating each word with chilling, deliberate precision. "For the final time, I am ordering you, as a sworn peace officer for the city of Northwood, to cease all fire suppression activities. This is a direct, final, and lawful order." It was the precipice. Carter looked past Riley's rigid form at the inferno. He saw the bowing delta wall, the smoke puffing from the mortar joints like a dying beast's last breaths. He saw his firefighters scrambling to reposition the heavy, charged hose lines. Everything in his 25 years of training, in his experience, in his very soul, screamed that to yield command of this scene to this officer's dangerous delusion would be a catastrophic dereliction of his duty. Harding's order wasn't just wrong, it was reckless. It wasn't a lawful order, it was an invitation to tragedy. Carter met the officer's glare, his own eyes like chips of flint. "And I am telling you, Officer Riley, that your order is unlawful, reckless, and endangers the lives of my firefighters and the public. I will not obey it. Now get the hell out of my command post." The words hung in the air, a final, irrevocable line drawn in the ash. For Officer Riley, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The overt challenge, the flat refusal to comply, short-circuited any last vestige of reason. The pretense of professional procedure vanished, replaced by the raw, blunt instrument of enforcement. "That's it," Riley bit out, his right hand moving with practiced speed to the back of his duty belt. "You're done." He unclipped his handcuffs. The metallic rasp of the chain was shockingly loud, a sound that cut through the roar of the fire and the hiss of water. It was the sound of a line being crossed from which there was no return. Carter watched the movement, a profound sense of weary disbelief settling over him like a shroud. It was actually happening. This officer, blinded by a toxic cocktail of ego and ignorance, was going to arrest him, in the middle of a 4-alarm fire, while he was in command. "Don't be a damn fool, son," Carter said, his voice low and steady, a final attempt to inject a dose of sanity into the escalating madness. "Put those away. You are making a mistake that you will not recover from." "The only mistake was me asking nicely," Riley snarled, stepping forward. "I'm arresting you for felony obstruction of a governmental operation and interfering with a police officer. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." The scene took on a nightmarish, slow-motion quality. Lieutenant Miller, who had been directing the engine repositioning, saw what was unfolding and started running back toward them, his face a mask of horrified confusion. "Hey, what in God's name is going on?" Several other firefighters from Engine 33 and Ladder 14 stopped what they were doing, their helmeted heads turning in unison. They stared, slack-jawed and frozen, as the police officer advanced on their captain. Across the street, onlookers who had been recording the fire on their phones now pivoted, their small red recording lights blinking in the smoky haze. They knew they were witnessing something far more bizarre and consequential than a warehouse fire. Carter did not move. He didn't comply, but he didn't resist. He simply stood his ground, a bulwark of defiance in his heavy, soot-stained turnout gear. "I will not turn around. I am the incident commander, and I have a duty to protect my firefighters and the public. You are interfering with my duties, officer." That was all the justification Riley needed. He interpreted Carter's steadfastness not as professional resolve, but as passive resistance. He lunged, grabbing Carter's left arm. The thick, unyielding bunker coat made for a poor grip. "I said turn around, now!" The physical contact was the final spark. Carter instinctively tensed, a lifetime of physical training reacting to the hostile grasp, but he made a conscious effort not to pull away, not to give Riley the satisfaction of claiming he'd resisted. "Get your hands off me," Carter commanded, his voice rumbling with a controlled fury that made the air vibrate. Miller arrived beside them, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Officer, for God's sake, stop! We have a building about to collapse. This is insane!" Riley ignored him, his entire world narrowing to the man in front of him. With his free hand, he grabbed Carter's other arm. The disparity in their size and weight made it an awkward, clumsy struggle. Riley was fit, but Carter was a solid mass of muscle and gear, like trying to wrestle a fire hydrant. "Stop resisting!" Riley yelled, the strain showing in his voice, though Carter was doing nothing of the sort. He managed to wrench Carter's right arm behind his back, the thick material of the coat bunching up. He fumbled with the handcuffs, his movements jerky with adrenaline. The first cuff snapped shut over the bulky sleeve of the turnout gear, not even close to touching skin. He pulled Carter off balance, spinning him around with a surge of effort, and finally secured the second cuff, linking the captain's hands awkwardly behind his back. Click! The sound was final, definitive. Captain Ben Carter of the Northwood Fire Department stood in the middle of the street, in front of the building he was sworn to protect, in front of the men he was sworn to lead. A prisoner. The sheer, gut-wrenching absurdity of it was a physical weight. He could feel the shocked, confused, and now leaderless eyes of his crew on him. He looked over Riley's shoulder at the burning warehouse. The Delta wall wasn't just bowing anymore. A long, dark, vertical fissure had split the brick facade from the roofline to the second floor. "My God," Carter breathed, not in anger, but in pure despair. "He's going to get someone killed." Riley shoved him forward toward his patrol car parked down the street. "You're the one who's going to get someone killed," he spat, misinterpreting the comment as a threat. "Should have followed orders." As he was frog-marched away, a prisoner on his own fire ground, Carter could only watch as the command structure he had meticulously maintained shattered into a million pieces. The ballet of firefighting ground to a halt. Hoses went slack. Men on ladders froze. A wave of paralysis washed over the scene. Lieutenant Miller, a good man and a capable officer, was now in command, but he was staring in stunned disbelief as his captain was forced into the back of a police car. The initiative was lost. And the fire, indifferent to the petty human drama unfolding below, seized its opportunity. With a deafening groan that sounded like the earth splitting open, the entire Delta wall peeled away from the building and collapsed inward, taking the roof and a huge section of the third floor with it in a churning tidal wave of fire, brick, and twisted steel. To understand the unwavering resolve that led Ben Carter to be handcuffed amidst a collapsing inferno, you had to understand the man himself. He hadn't just chosen to be a firefighter. In many ways, the fire service had chosen him. His father had been a captain in the same department, his uncle a battalion chief. The smell of diesel and the blare of a firehouse alarm were the soundtrack of his childhood. For 25 years, he had worn the uniform of the Northwood Fire Department, climbing the ranks from a wide-eyed probationary firefighter, a probie, to the deeply respected captain of Engine 33, one of the city's busiest and most decorated companies. His personnel file was a thick testament to a career lived on the front lines of human tragedy and heroism. It was filled with commendations for valor, letters of gratitude from families whose homes he had saved, and official citations for life-saving rescues. The paper trail, however, only told a fraction of the story. It didn't capture the suffocating blackness of the bedroom where he'd found a 3-year-old girl hiding under a bed, shielding her with his own body as he carried her through the smoke. It didn't convey the bone-deep exhaustion of performing CPR for 20 minutes on a heart attack victim until paramedics could take over, or the searing pain in his shoulder as he held up a collapsing doorframe just long enough for his partner to drag an unconscious homeowner to safety. Carter lived by a clear, unambiguous hierarchy of priorities, a catechism drilled into him at the academy and reinforced by a quarter-century of experience. Life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation. That precise order was not a suggestion. It was the sacred, inviolable creed of his profession. To him, a fire scene was a dynamic, hostile environment where the laws of physics and chemistry were the enemy. You fought it with training, discipline, and an aggressive, calculated assault. You didn't pause. You didn't debate. You acted, because hesitation was the currency of tragedy. Seconds lost meant lives lost, buildings lost, control lost. His authority on a fire ground wasn't merely granted by a municipal code. It was earned in flames, paid for with sweat and scars, and respected by every firefighter who served under him. They didn't follow his orders just because of the white helmet on his head. They followed them because they had seen him make the right call under unimaginable pressure time and time again. They trusted his judgment with their lives because he had proven repeatedly that their safety was his paramount concern. He was a man who saw chaos and imposed order, who stood on the line between a community and disaster and refused to yield. He wasn't a hero in his own mind. He was simply a man doing his job, a job that he believed in with every fiber of his being. This unwavering dedication to his duty was the bedrock of his identity. It was also the reason he could not, under any circumstance, obey an order that violated the very core of that duty, no matter who gave it. For Ben Carter, allowing Officer Riley's uniformed ignorance to endanger his crew would have been a greater failure than any fire he had ever faced. Then there was Officer Evan Riley. At 36, he was a 10-year veteran of the Northwood Police Department, but he carried himself with the unearned certainty of a man who had been in charge his entire life. Unlike Carter's legacy of service, Riley's path into law enforcement was born from a place of deep-seated insecurity. Growing up, he had always felt overlooked, average. A badge and a gun were, to him, the ultimate symbols of importance, a way to command the respect he felt he was owed. He saw the world not as a complex tapestry of human interaction, but as a stark black-and-white equation. There were rules, and there were the people who broke them. He was the enforcer of those rules, and his authority was, in his mind, absolute and beyond question. Riley was fiercely ambitious. He had already tested for sergeant twice and narrowly missed the promotion list both times, a failure he blamed not on his own shortcomings, but on departmental politics. He saw himself as a sharp, intuitive investigator, a solver of complex puzzles that lesser minds couldn't grasp. He was a voracious consumer of true crime documentaries and police procedural dramas, often mistaking their dramatized narratives for tactical reality. This belief in his own superior investigative intellect, however, far outstripped his actual training or experience. His own personnel file told a different story than Carter's. While it contained no sustained disciplinary actions, it was dotted with a concerning number of citizen complaints over his decade of service, mostly for aggressive traffic stops, verbal altercations, and what his previous sergeant had diplomatically termed a confrontational demeanor during field interviews. Each complaint had been investigated and ultimately dismissed with a note about Riley needing to improve his de-escalation skills. His superiors saw him as a bulldog, aggressive, sometimes creating problems, but effective at generating arrests and citations. He had never learned the critical distinction between the authority his badge conferred and the respect that must be earned. He believed the former automatically guaranteed the latter. His arrival at the warehouse fire that Tuesday morning was a direct result of this ambition. He had been on patrol nearby when the call was upgraded to a second alarm. While firefighters saw a dangerous structure fire to be contained, Riley saw a golden opportunity. A major fire at a recently bankrupted business? To him, the conclusion was obvious. He wasn't just a patrol officer anymore. In his own mind, he was the lead investigator on a high-profile felony arson case. This was his chance to shine, to make the kind of collar that would guarantee his promotion to detective. From that warped perspective, Captain Carter wasn't a fellow first responder engaged in a parallel life-saving mission. He was an obstacle. He was a contaminant, an old-timer from a different, less important discipline who, in his ignorance, was destroying the clues Riley needed to build his career-making case. This fundamental disconnect was the spark that ignited the confrontation. Carter saw a dynamic, evolving emergency that had to be stabilized above all else. Riley saw a static crime scene that needed to be frozen in time at his command. Carter's authority was derived from the immediate, tangible threat of the fire. Riley's was derived from the abstract power of his badge. On that patch of scorched asphalt, these two worldviews, one forged in fire, the other in ego, were destined for a catastrophic collision. The 10-minute drive from the fire scene to the Northwood Police Department's central precinct was the longest of Ben Carter's life. The back of the patrol car was a cage of tense silence, broken only by the crackle of the police radio and the distant fading wail of sirens that were now responding to a disaster he was no longer allowed to command. He sat wedged in the back, the handcuffs digging painfully into the thick material of his bunker coat, the adrenaline of the fire being replaced by a slow, simmering rage. He stared at the back of Officer Riley's head. The young man was a knot of coiled tension, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, locked in a world where he was the hero who had bravely brought a rogue public servant to heel. Carter forced himself to control his breathing, a technique he'd mastered in smoke-filled rooms with his air tank alarm screaming. Panic was useless. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed to think. He replayed the entire incident in his mind. Had he been unclear? No. Had he been unprofessional? No. He had stated his duty, his legal authority as incident commander, and the immediate life safety risks. Riley's actions weren't a misunderstanding. They were a willful, dangerous, and criminally negligent overreach of authority. When they arrived at the station's sallyport, the sterile concrete and fluorescent lights were a jarring contrast to the heat and chaos of the fire. Riley led him inside. The moment they entered the main bullpen, a hub of ringing phones and clacking keyboards, all activity ceased. Heads lifted from desks. The sight was so incongruous it seemed staged. A police officer escorting a fire captain in full soot-stained turnout gear, his hands cuffed behind his back. Cops and firefighters in Northwood had a relationship built on a foundation of mutual respect, a friendly interdepartmental rivalry that vanished in the face of a true emergency. This was a profound violation of that unspoken pact. A stout, gray-haired desk sergeant named Kowalski looked up over the top of his reading glasses, his pen freezing mid-sentence. He'd been on the job for 30 years and thought he'd seen it all. "Riley, what in the name of God is this?" Kowalski asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "Arrested him for felony obstruction, Sarge," Riley announced, a little too loudly, a tremor of defensive pride in his voice. He nudged Carter toward the booking desk. "Refused to follow a lawful order at a fire scene. Interfered with my investigation." Kowalski slowly took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a motion Carter recognized as the universal sign of a man confronted with monumental stupidity. He knew Captain Ben Carter. He'd worked dozens of calls with him over the years. Horrific car wrecks, multi-agency standoffs, medical emergencies. He knew Carter as a calm, competent professional, the last person on Earth you'd expect to see in handcuffs. He looked from Riley's rigid, self-righteous expression to Carter's weary, soot-covered face. He looked at the bulky turnout gear, the helmet still clipped to Carter's belt, the radio still slung over his shoulder. "You arrested the fire captain while he was commanding a 4-alarm fire?" Kowalski asked, his tone making it clear he was struggling to process the very concept. "He was destroying my crime scene," Riley insisted. The booking process that followed was a descent into bureaucratic farce. A young patrolman had to help Carter out of his heavy turnout coat because of the handcuffs, revealing his sweat-soaked uniform shirt underneath. The officer began cataloging Carter's possessions: a thermal imaging camera, a multi-gas meter, a firefighter's spanner wrench, a webbing strap, a wallet containing his driver's license, photos of his wife and kids, and his fire department ID, clearly identifying him as Captain Ben Carter. The items laid out on the counter weren't the tools of a criminal, they were the tools of a lifesaver. "Any weapons on you, Captain?" the young officer asked, the title coming out automatically, almost apologetically. Carter just stared at him. Kowalski picked up the arrest report Riley was filling out. He read the narrative, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. "Your report says you ordered him to cease all fire suppression activities. All of them?" "That's correct, Sarge. To preserve the integrity of the scene." Kowalski put the report down and looked at Riley as if he were an alien species he was trying to identify. "Son, are you aware that the State Municipal Code, Section 2.34, subsection B, explicitly grants the ranking fire officer sole command authority over all operations within the immediate fire ground? That includes the authority to deny access to anyone, including law enforcement, if their presence interferes with fire suppression or poses a safety risk." Riley's confidence wavered for the first time. "He was obstructing my investigation," he began, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "What you call an investigation, he calls a building collapse," Kowalski countered, his voice flat. He turned to Carter. "Captain, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, Walt," Carter said, his voice raspy from the smoke. "But the city of Northwood is about to be in a world of hurt." The words hung in the sterile air of the police station. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. And looking at the evidence laid out on the booking counter, Sergeant Kowalski knew with a sinking feeling in his gut that the captain was absolutely right. The moment Officer Riley's voice crackled over the police radio, stating with detached professionalism, "Be advised, I have one in custody," and provided Captain Carter's name, the information spread through the city's emergency services network like a lit fuse. In the 911 dispatch center, a stunned silence fell over the room. The dispatcher handling the fire frequency, a veteran who knew every captain by the sound of their voice, had to ask Riley to repeat the transmission. Twice. The transmission was immediately flagged with a critical alert and escalated to every supervisor in the building. At the chaotic fire scene, Lieutenant Miller, in between shouting orders to reposition lines around the collapsed wall, had managed to get on his own radio to his battalion chief. His transmission was a strained, almost breathless summary of the impossible situation. "Chief, be advised, command has been compromised. Captain Carter has been taken into custody by NPD. I've assumed command. We have had a major structural collapse on the Delta side. The situation is deteriorating." Battalion Chief O'Connell, a grizzled veteran who was en route, nearly swerved his command SUV off the road. "Repeat that, Miller. Say again your last transmission." "Sir, PD has arrested the captain, on scene, for obstruction." Within minutes, the news rocketed up the chains of command in both departments. And, crucially, it reached the one organization built for moments precisely like this: the Northwood Firefighters Union, Local 212. Union President Mike Costello was in a budget meeting at City Hall, arguing about pension contributions, when his phone buzzed with a priority text message from Miller. He excused himself, stepped into the hallway, read the message, and his face, normally ruddy and cheerful, turned to stone. Costello was a retired fire captain himself, a bulldog of a man who viewed his union members as his own family. An attack on one was an attack on all. The arrest of a captain on his own fire ground, in the middle of a battle? That wasn't just an attack, it was a declaration of war. He immediately made 2 calls. The first was to Fire Chief Henderson, informing him in no uncertain terms that the Union was mobilizing its full legal resources and that the city had just created a crisis of unprecedented proportions. "Chief, one of my captains is in handcuffs because some patrolman with an ego got his feelings hurt. You need to fix this, or I will burn this city down, and I won't need a gallon of gasoline to do it." The second call was to a number on his speed dial, one reserved for the most serious of emergencies. "Julia, it's Mike. We have a 5-alarm emergency, and it's not a fire. I need you at the Central Precinct, now." Julia Hayes was the Union's secret weapon. She was a named partner at a high-powered downtown law firm, a former prosecutor who had switched sides to specialize in civil rights and labor law. She was razor-sharp, relentless, and possessed a formidable, encyclopedic knowledge of the intricate laws governing emergency services. She had defended firefighters in disciplinary hearings, sued municipalities over unsafe equipment, and had once made a city manager cry during a deposition. She was, in short, the last person the city's attorneys ever wanted to see walking into a courtroom. While Julia was en route, a parallel storm was brewing inside the police department. Riley's supervisor, Sergeant Franks, had arrived at the fire scene to find an unmitigated disaster. The warehouse was a blackened, collapsing ruin. A neighboring commercial building now had smoke pouring from its roof vents, a clear sign the fire had jumped the alley. A clearly overwhelmed Lieutenant Miller was trying to coordinate a massive mutual aid response from 3 different jurisdictions. "Where is Officer Riley?" Franks demanded. "He arrested our captain and left," Miller yelled back over the noise of a new engine arriving. "Took him downtown." Franks's blood ran cold. He got back in his car and sped to the station, a feeling of profound dread growing with every block. He knew Riley. He knew his ambition and his temper. He walked into the bullpen and was met by the sight of Captain Carter sitting on a bench in the booking area, still in his filthy uniform, and Sergeant Kowalski looking like he'd just witnessed a public execution. This was worse than he could have possibly imagined. The fire department wasn't just a separate city agency, they were brothers in arms. Riley hadn't just arrested a man, he had broken a sacred trust, and the fallout was just beginning. Julia Hayes moved through the police station with the focused, unhurried confidence of a shark entering a new feeding ground. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue pantsuit, her briefcase held firmly in one hand. She didn't look angry. She looked energized, as if the sheer audacity of the situation was a complex legal problem she couldn't wait to solve. She radiated an aura of pure competence that made the officers in the bullpen instinctively sit up straighter and avoid eye contact. Sergeant Kowalski, looking immensely relieved, led her to a small, glass-walled conference room where Captain Carter was waiting. The sight of him, a decorated captain with 25 years of service, covered in the soot and grime of a battle he'd been forcibly removed from, sitting in a police interrogation room like a common criminal, sent a fresh wave of cold determination through her. "Ben," she said, her voice calm and professional as she set her briefcase on the table and opened it. "Mike Costello called me. Let's get you out of here. Tell me everything from the moment the officer arrived." Carter recounted the events, his voice a low, tired monotone. He wasn't emotional. He was a commander giving an after-action report, sticking to the facts, the orders given, the responses received. He detailed Riley's bizarre demands, his own explanations of fire dynamics, and his legal responsibilities as incident commander, and the final, unbelievable moment of the arrest. Julia listened intently, her pen flying across a legal pad. She asked clarifying questions, sharp and precise. Did he ever identify what specific crime he was investigating, other than a vague assertion of arson? Did he make any attempt to contact an actual arson investigator before demanding you stop your operations? Were there any other officers present who witnessed your conversation? When he finished, she closed her notepad. "This is beyond outrageous, but legally it's simple," she said, her voice firm. "His order to cease fire suppression during an active, life-threatening emergency was patently unlawful. An order that is unlawful on its face cannot be legally obeyed. Therefore, your refusal to obey it cannot constitute obstruction. The arrest is invalid from its inception. It's a false arrest, pure and simple. And his actions led directly to the escalation of the fire and the collapse. The civil liability is catastrophic." She stood up. "Wait here, this won't take long." She walked out of the conference room and straight to the office of Captain Dempsey, the watch commander, who was already on the phone with someone from the city attorney's office, trying to explain an indefensible situation. Julia didn't knock. She just walked in and stood there, arms crossed, until he finished his call. "Captain Dempsey," she said, her tone leaving no room for pleasantries, "I am Julia Hayes. I represent Captain Ben Carter and the Northwood Firefighters Union. I have reviewed the preliminary facts, and it is my legal opinion that your Officer Riley has committed a Class C felony by unlawfully interfering with an emergency responder, in addition to the tort of false arrest. You are currently holding a decorated fire captain against his will without a shred of valid legal cause, while his fire department is still engaged in a major conflagration downtown that his arrest has made exponentially worse. Dempsey, a man used to being in control, found himself completely on the back foot. Ms. Hayes, we are still gathering the facts. The facts are clear, she cut in, her voice like ice. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to release Captain Carter immediately and unconditionally. The charges will be dropped before they are even filed. His personal and professional effects will be returned to him, and he will be provided with a police escort back to his fire station. If these things do not happen in the next 5 minutes, my first call will be to a federal magistrate to file an emergency writ of habeas corpus. My second will be to every news station in this city. And my third will be to start drafting a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Riley personally and the city of Northwood that will make your head spin. Am I clear? The captain stared at her. He saw no bluff, no room for negotiation. He was a career police officer who knew a losing hand when it was dealt. He had spent the last 20 minutes on the phone with a flustered city attorney who had given him one clear directive: mitigate the damage. Julia Hayes was offering him the only off-ramp available. He picked up his desk phone. Kowalski, release Captain Carter, return his property, uncuff him and bring him to my office, now. 30 minutes after Julia Hayes had walked into the station, Captain Ben Carter walked out the front door. He was a free man, the absurd charges already evaporating into the ether of bureaucratic damage control. His turnout gear was in a clear plastic bag in his hand. Mike Costello was waiting for him, leaning against a car. You okay, Ben? I'm fine, Carter said, his voice flat. But he wasn't. A line had been crossed that he could never uncross. He had been publicly humiliated, his authority undermined, his crew endangered, all because of the fragile ego of one police officer. The battle at the precinct was over, but the war was just beginning. The next morning, under a cold gray sky that mirrored his mood, Ben Carter drove back to the scene. He needed to see it. He needed to stand on the ground where his command had been shattered and witness the full consequences of Officer Riley's actions. The street was no longer a chaotic symphony of fire engines and police cars. It was eerily quiet, cordoned off with yellow tape that fluttered in the breeze like a sad, forgotten party streamer. What was left of the Red Stag Ironworks was a blackened, skeletal ruin. The roof was completely gone, leaving the charred top floor joists exposed to the sky like the ribs of a desiccated carcass. The Delta Wall, the one he'd been worried about, was now a massive pile of rubble inside the building's footprint. But it was the sight of the adjacent building that made his stomach clench. The exposure he had fought to protect, a small manufacturing business, was a disaster zone. The entire western wall was a mess of melted siding and dark, water-stained concrete, and a large section of its roof had burned through. A standard warehouse fire, one that should have been contained and knocked down with minimal exposure damage, had turned into a neighborhood catastrophe. Battalion Chief O'Connell was there, along with the city's lead arson investigator, a veteran detective named Corrigan, who had worked with Carter on dozens of scenes. Corrigan, a man who normally had a cynical joke for every occasion, was methodically walking the perimeter, his expression grim. Ben, O'Connell said, clapping a hand on Carter's shoulder. Hell of a thing yesterday. You holding up? I'll be fine, Carter answered, his eyes fixed on the wreckage. What's the verdict, Corrigan? Did you find Riley's criminal mastermind? Corrigan let out a bitter, humorless laugh. I found a whole lot of nothing, Ben, which is exactly what I expected to find. The kid's theory was based on, well, nothing. The point of origin was in a pile of trash and old pallets near the rear loading dock, right next to a hole in the fence, just like the initial 911 call from the passing motorist said. We found 2 empty cans of sterno and a discarded sleeping bag. Looks like some homeless guys tried to start a small warming fire that got out of control. It was a tragic, straightforward accident. He kicked at a piece of charred debris. The thing that kills me is, if he'd just let you do your job, we might have been able to confirm that definitively. We could have saved that point of origin, secured the evidence. But the defensive attack you were forced into, the collapse, the sheer volume of water we had to dump for hours to save the neighbor's building, everything is either buried under 10 tons of brick or washed into the damn storm drain. Riley didn't preserve a crime scene. He created a scene so contaminated that I can't officially rule out arson, even though I know damn well that's not what happened. The warehouse owner's insurance claim is going to be a nightmare, and the owner of the business next door is completely wiped out. The irony was a physical weight in Carter's gut. In his zeal to play detective, Officer Riley had created the very ambiguity he claimed to be preventing. His interference had not only resulted in the complete destruction of the primary structure and catastrophic damage to the secondary one, but it had also rendered a proper, conclusive investigation impossible. Carter felt a cold fury settle deep inside him. This was the tangible result of Riley's ego. A business owner had lost everything. Their neighbors faced ruinous repairs. The city had expended enormous resources in mutual aid from 3 other towns, and dozens of firefighters had been put at unnecessary risk during and after the collapse. All because one officer couldn't stand being told no. He spent another hour at the scene, talking with O'Connell and Corrigan, documenting the damage with the cold, analytical eye of an incident commander. He saw every tactical failure that had been forced upon his team after he was removed. He saw the ghost of the building that could have been saved. That afternoon, he met with Julia Hayes and Mike Costello at the Union Hall. He laid out what he had seen and what Corrigan had confirmed. The picture was now complete and damning. "It's a perfect storm," Julia said, pacing the room, her energy palpable. "We have a clear violation of your Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful seizure. That's the false arrest. We have a First Amendment violation, as he retaliated against you for questioning his authority. And we have a 14th Amendment substantive due process claim because his actions were so arbitrary and conscience-shocking that they deprived you of your liberty without any rational basis. But the core of this suit," she paused, looking at Carter, "the part that will make a jury's blood boil, is the deliberate indifference. He showed a deliberate indifference to your safety, to your crew's safety, and to the safety of the public by actively interfering with a critical emergency operation. That's the heart of it. The city needs to feel this," Costello added, his voice low, "not just in their checkbook, but in their policies. We need to make sure no cop ever thinks they can pull a stunt like this again." "So, we're doing this?" Carter asked, though he already knew the answer. "We're doing this," Julia confirmed. "The complaint will name Officer Riley individually for his actions and the city of Northwood for failure to train and supervise its officers. We're not just asking for damages, Ben. We're demanding a court-ordered change in policy. We're going to force them to fix this." Standing in the Union Hall, surrounded by the faded photographs of firefighters who had come before him, Carter felt the weight of his decision settle. This was no longer just his fight. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed in federal court, the story broke. A local news station, tipped off by a source inside the fire department, ran a segment on the 6 o'clock news. They had a reporter standing in front of the yellow-taped ruin of the ironworks, narrating the bizarre events of Captain Carter's arrest. The report was explosive because it included cell phone footage, shaky and pixelated but undeniably clear, showing Officer Riley forcing a uniformed fire captain into the back of a patrol car while the warehouse burned furiously in the background. The story was an instant sensation. It was picked up by national news outlets and went viral on social media within hours. The image of a firefighter being arrested while doing his job was a powerful, visceral symbol of authority gone wrong. The hashtag #LetThemWork trended for 2 days. The city of Northwood was officially in crisis mode. The mayor's office was flooded with angry calls from citizens. The city manager was in emergency meetings with the police and fire chiefs, who were now barely on speaking terms. The public relations damage was immense and immediate. The city's legal department, a risk-averse entity by nature, knew they were in an untenable position. Their first move was a classic gambit of damage control. Try to make the problem go away quickly and quietly. Less than a week after the suit was filed, Julia Hayes received a call from Arthur Vance, the lead counsel for the city. Vance was a polished, veteran litigator who specialized in making problems like this disappear. "Julia, a pleasure as always," he began, his voice smooth and conciliatory. "I've reviewed the complaint regarding the incident with Captain Carter. It's a very unfortunate situation. A clear case of two dedicated public servants having a professional disagreement under extremely stressful circumstances." Julia wasn't biting. "A professional disagreement, Arthur? One of those public servants ended up in handcuffs for doing his job, while the other one's incompetence led to the destruction of 2 buildings and endangered dozens of lives. I'd call that something a little more serious." Of course," Vance said smoothly. "Look, the city values its relationship with its first responders. We want to make this right. To avoid the time and expense of protracted litigation for everyone involved, the city is prepared to offer Captain Carter a settlement. Let's say $75,000 for his trouble. We'll also issue a formal apology from the police department." Julia was silent for a moment, letting the sheer insult of the offer hang in the air. $75,000. It was nuisance value, a go-away number. It was the kind of offer you make when you think the other side will be intimidated or just wants a quick payday. It was an offer that completely failed to grasp the magnitude of what was at stake. "Arthur," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "let me be perfectly clear. We are not interested in trouble money. We are not interested in a token apology that will be forgotten by the next news cycle. We are interested in justice and systemic change." That offer is not only insulting to Captain Carter, it's insulting to every firefighter in this country who has ever been bullied by a cop on a scene. The answer is no. "Julia, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," she interrupted. "You have an officer who committed a false arrest. You have a department whose training protocols are clearly and demonstrably inadequate. You have a viral video of the event being played on a loop on national television. And you have a fire captain with an impeccable 25-year record and the full backing of his national union. You think $75,000 covers that? We are going to discovery. We are going to get every email, every training manual, and every single complaint file related to Officer Evan Riley. And we are going to depose him under oath. We will see you in court." When Julia relayed the city's offer to Carter and Costello at the Union Hall, the reaction was exactly what she expected. Carter just shook his head in disgust. Costello laughed out loud. "75 grand?" Costello scoffed. "That wouldn't even cover the damage to the neighbor's roof. They think we're fools." "No," Julia corrected. "They think we can be bought off cheaply. They're testing us. They want to see if this is about money or about principle. This is their first move in a long game of chess." Carter leaned forward, his expression resolute. "I didn't go through that humiliation to walk away with pocket change. Mike is right. This is about making sure this never happens again. I don't care if it takes 5 years. I don't care if I don't see a dime. I want the policy changed. I want cops to be trained that a fireground commander's word is law. Period." Julia smiled. It was the answer she knew she would get. "That's what I told them. So we prepare for war. Discovery starts next week. The first thing on my list is a request for Officer Riley's unedited body camera footage. Let's see what his version of the story looks like when the camera is rolling." The city's gambit had failed spectacularly. Instead of ending the fight, their insulting offer had poured fuel on the fire. It had erased any possibility of a quick resolution and solidified the resolve of Carter and his team. They weren't just fighting for a check. They were fighting for a cause. and the city had just signaled that they were not prepared to take that cause seriously. It was a mistake they would come to deeply regret. The discovery phase of a lawsuit is a slow, methodical process of trench warfare fought not with bullets, but with paper and digital files. For 4 grueling months, Julia Hayes's office relentlessly pursued every piece of information related to the incident at the Red Stag Ironworks. They filed subpoenas for dispatch logs, police and fire radio recordings, training manuals, interagency protocols, and all internal affairs records. The city's attorneys, led by Arthur Vance, fought back at every turn. They filed motions to quash subpoenas, claiming certain documents were privileged or irrelevant. They produced heavily redacted reports. It was a classic legal strategy of delay and obfuscation designed to wear down the plaintiff, to make the process so expensive and time-consuming that they would give up and accept a lesser settlement. But Julia, backed by the deep pockets and unwavering resolve of the Firefighters Union, pushed through every obstruction. The documents they did manage to pry loose began to paint a damning picture. The Northwood Police Department's own written policies on interagency cooperation at emergency scenes were vague, contradictory, and hadn't been updated in over a decade. Officer Riley's training records showed he had scored the minimum passing grade on the section covering the incident command system. His personnel file, once unsealed by court order after a contentious hearing, confirmed the pattern of citizen complaints for aggressive conduct that his superiors had consistently dismissed. But the real prize, the bombshell piece of evidence that would transform the case from a he said, she said dispute into an open and shut case of gross misconduct, was the body camera footage. The city fought tooth and nail to keep it under wraps. They claimed it was part of an ongoing internal investigation into Officer Riley's conduct and therefore could not be released. It was a transparent stalling tactic. Julia took the matter directly to the federal magistrate overseeing the case. In a heated conference call, she was blunt. "Your Honor, the city is hiding the single most important piece of evidence in this case under the guise of an internal investigation that they only started after we filed our lawsuit. The camera doesn't lie. It will show exactly what was said and done. They know what's on that video, and they know it is devastating to their case. This is a bad faith attempt to obstruct justice." The magistrate, an impatient former prosecutor, was not impressed with the city's arguments. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice cold, "this is a civil rights case. The public has a right to see how its officers are behaving. Your internal investigation can proceed, but it will not be used as a shield to hide evidence in a federal lawsuit. You will turn over the unedited footage of Officer Riley's camera from that incident to Ms. Hayes's office within 48 hours. No redactions, no excuses." The day the file arrived was electric. Julia, Carter, and Mike Costello gathered in a conference room at her law firm to watch it for the first time. The footage began with Riley in his patrol car, arriving at the scene. The audio captured his breathing, heavy and quick with excitement. "Looks like a big one," he muttered to himself, a thrill in his voice. The camera's unblinking eye recorded everything from his perspective. It showed him striding past other firefighters, ignoring a lieutenant who tried to give him a situation report, his gaze fixed on the burning building with an unnerving intensity. He was a man on a mission, and that mission had nothing to do with public safety. Then came the confrontation with Carter. The camera captured Carter's calm, professional demeanor, his clear and repeated explanations of the tactical situation, and his legal authority. "Son, this is an active fire ground. I am the incident commander." The words were crystal clear, his tone firm but not aggressive. In stark contrast, the footage exposed Riley's escalating agitation. His voice grew louder, his interruptions more frequent. The camera's microphone picked up his side of a radio conversation with his dispatcher, where he grandiosely announced he was securing a potential felony arson scene, a declaration based on no evidence whatsoever. The most damning portion, however, was the arrest itself. The camera showed Carter standing his ground, not moving, not threatening. It then clearly recorded Riley shouting, "Stop resisting!" while the visual evidence showed absolutely no resistance at all. The lens jerked and bounced as Riley struggled clumsily to cuff the much larger man, making his actions look more like a frantic assault than a controlled arrest. It captured Lieutenant Miller's desperate pleas to stop, which Riley completely ignored. The digital ghost in the machine had spoken, and its testimony was irrefutable. The war for evidence was over. Julia had her weapon. The body camera footage was more than just a piece of evidence. It was the entire story, told from the villain's point of view. As Julia, Carter, and Costello continued to watch in the silent conference room, the final, devastating chapter of the recording unfolded. After successfully cuffing Carter and shoving him toward his patrol car, Riley walked back toward the fire. The camera was still running, recording a panoramic view of the chaos he had just unleashed. It recorded the deafening groan and then the spectacular collapse of the Delta Wall. It recorded the geyser of embers and flaming debris that shot into the air, a fiery mushroom cloud against the morning sky. It recorded the shouts of alarm from the firefighters who were now scrambling in confusion, their commander gone, their tactical plans shattered. And then, it recorded the embers landing on the roof of the neighboring business. It recorded the first tentative wisps of smoke, followed by the first hungry licks of flame. The fire was jumping the alley. The scene was escalating from a major incident to a full-blown conflagration. The camera recorded firefighters yelling, pointing, trying to reorganize a defense on a second front. It recorded Lieutenant Miller, his voice strained, trying to call for more resources while simultaneously directing his existing stunned crews. And what did it record of Officer Evan Riley, the man who had seized control of the scene to preserve evidence? It recorded him standing there, doing nothing. He made no effort to help, no effort to assist with traffic or crowd control, a primary function of police at a fire scene. He didn't check on the firefighters. He didn't even radio in the new secondary fire. He was a passive observer, watching the disaster he had personally precipitated unfold before him. His face, when he turned slightly and it was caught in the reflection of a truck window, was a mask of grim satisfaction. He had won his power struggle. He had asserted his authority. The consequences, it seemed, were irrelevant to him. When the video finally ended, the conference room was utterly silent. Carter stared at the blank screen, his jaw tight. Watching the event from Riley's perspective was a profoundly unsettling, almost sickening experience. He had seen the raw, unfiltered ego and the chilling indifference that had driven the entire catastrophic chain of events. Costello let out a long, low whistle. "My God," he whispered. He recorded his own crime. He filmed himself creating a bigger disaster and then did nothing to stop it. Julia Hayes was already on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a new motion to the court. "This changes everything," she said, her voice electric with a litigator's focused excitement. "This isn't just evidence supporting our claims anymore. This is the whole case. No jury in the world, no judge, no mediator will watch this and side with the officer. We don't even need to call witnesses. His camera is our star witness." The body camera, a tool intended to promote police accountability and protect officers from false claims, had become the prosecution's most powerful weapon. It was an objective, unblinking observer that had captured not just the events, but the intent, or lack thereof, behind them. It showed a fire captain performing his duty with textbook professionalism, and a police officer abandoning his own duty in a reckless, ego-driven pursuit of authority. Julia saved a copy of the footage to a thumb drive. She filed a copy with the court as a new exhibit, and she sent another copy via courier to Arthur Vance at the city's legal department with a simple 3-word email attached. "Your move, Arthur." The city's case, already weak, had just gone up in smoke. The unblinking witness had given its testimony, and it was irrefutable. There was nowhere left for them to hide. The deposition of Officer Evan Riley took place in a sterile, beige conference room at a neutral law firm. It was a formal legal proceeding, conducted under oath, with a court reporter transcribing every single word. Riley arrived, flanked by Arthur Vance and a nervous-looking police union attorney. He wore his dress uniform, complete with polished buttons and military-style ribbons, presumably to project an image of professionalism and unimpeachable authority. He looked confident, almost cocky, but a small muscle twitching in his jaw betrayed his nerves. Ben Carter was there, sitting silently beside Julia Hayes. His presence was a strategic choice. Julia wanted Riley to have to look at the man whose life and career he had upended while he answered her questions under penalty of perjury. For the first hour, Julia was disarmingly calm. She walked Riley through his background, his training at the police academy, his years on the force. It was a standard, almost boring procedure designed to lull him into a false sense of security. Then, she pivoted to the day of the fire. Officer Riley, when you arrived on scene at the Red Stag Ironworks, what was your primary duty as a responding police officer? She asked. To secure the scene, maintain a perimeter for public safety, and investigate any potential criminal activity, he answered, the words sounding rehearsed and memorized. And what did you observe upon arrival that led you to believe there was criminal activity? I observed a structure fire that was, in my opinion, disproportionately large for the time of day, at a business I knew to be recently bankrupt. The circumstances were inherently suspicious. Let's talk about those suspicious circumstances, officer, Julia said, leaning forward slightly. Did you find an accelerant? Did you see any signs of forced entry? Did you have any physical evidence at all to support your theory of arson at that time? The fire itself was the evidence. How quickly it spread. Officer Riley, are you a state-certified arson investigator? No, but have you had more than the basic academy training in fire dynamics, flashover conditions, or burn patterns in commercial structures? I've attended some departmental briefings. So you have no expert qualifications in this field. Yet you felt your layman's assessment of the fire superseded that of a 25-year veteran fire captain who is an expert in that field. Is that correct? Riley's confident demeanor began to fray. He wasn't listening to me. He was arrogant and dismissive of my authority. Julia's eyes narrowed. The trap was sprung. So this wasn't about evidence, was it, officer? It was about Captain Carter not showing you what you felt was the proper respect. He was insubordinate, Riley snapped, his voice rising. Arthur Vance put a calming hand on his arm, but the damage was done. Julia let the outburst hang in the air for a moment before continuing. You ordered him to cease all fire suppression activities, correct? Yes, to preserve the scene. Were you aware that the building was, at that moment, in danger of imminent structural collapse? I'm not a structural engineer. No, but Captain Carter is a trained incident commander who is qualified to make that assessment. And he told you the structure was failing, did he not? Riley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He might have said something to that effect. And you chose to ignore him. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Julia stood up and walked to a large monitor at the end of the room. Let's review a piece of evidence, shall we? She played the body camera footage. The room was silent as they watched the entire confrontation play out. They watched Riley yell, "Stop resisting!" at a stationary Ben Carter. They watched him ignore the roof collapse and the spread of the fire to the neighboring building. When it was over, Julia turned back to Riley. His face was pale, all the previous bravado gone. Officer Riley, she began, her voice cold and precise. Your body camera shows Captain Carter standing perfectly still when you accuse him of resisting arrest. Can you explain that discrepancy? Silence. It shows you standing idly by, watching the fire spread to an adjacent property after you arrested the one man on scene legally responsible for preventing that from happening. Can you explain why you made no effort to assist or even report the new fire? Silence. Can you explain to me, Officer Riley, how arresting a fire captain and allowing a fire to engulf a second building helped you preserve evidence for your so-called arson investigation? Riley looked to his lawyers for help, but they could offer none. He was trapped by his own words, his own actions, all captured on his own camera. He shouldn't have defied a lawful order, Riley finally stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Julia walked back to the table and sat down. She looked directly at him, her gaze unflinching. "One final question, officer. At any point during this entire incident, from the moment you arrived to the moment you drove away, did it ever occur to you that Captain Carter might have been right?" The deposition was over. Riley's defense, his justifications, his entire professional identity had been systematically dismantled under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the truth. His own testimony had confirmed he was driven not by procedure or evidence, but by a bruised ego and a fatal misunderstanding of his own authority. The transcript would be a monument to his folly, and Julia Hayes had just chiseled it in stone. The day after Officer Riley's disastrous deposition, the city's legal department went into full-blown panic mode. Arthur Vance had the transcript on his desk, and it read like a confession. It was a multi-hour record of an officer digging his own professional grave, one defensive, illogical, and self-incriminating answer at a time. Vance knew that if a jury ever heard this testimony, or worse, saw the body camera footage in open court, the result would be a financial cataclysm for the city. The optics were indefensible. A calm, professional fire captain being arrested by an arrogant, incompetent cop who then stood by and watched as the situation spiraled into a multi-building inferno. Vance called Julia Hayes. The smooth, confident tone was gone, replaced by one of weary pragmatism. "Julia," he said, the sound of defeat heavy in his voice, "I think it's time we discussed a realistic resolution to this case. The city is prepared to enter into mediation." Mediation was the last stop before a full-blown trial. It was a formal settlement conference presided over by a neutral third party, usually a retired judge, where both sides laid their cards on the table in a final attempt to avoid the massive cost and uncertainty of a jury trial. They met a month later in the stately wood-paneled office of a retired federal judge named Wallace. The city's team, Vance, a deputy city manager, and a stone-faced police captain, came armed with risk assessments and actuarial tables. Julia Hayes came armed with the body camera footage on a laptop, Riley's deposition transcript in a thick binder, and Captain Ben Carter, dressed not in a suit, but in his immaculate Class A Fire Department dress uniform, his medals gleaming on his chest. His presence was a quiet, powerful statement. The morning session was a presentation of cases. Vance argued that it was a case of miscommunication under pressure, a mistake made in good faith by an officer trying to do his job. He emphasized that Riley had no prior sustained disciplinary actions, conveniently ignoring the dozen dismissed citizen complaints. He made a new settlement offer, one that showed how much their position had weakened. "The city is prepared to offer Captain Carter a settlement of $1 million, Vance announced. Judge Wallace, an old, shrewd jurist with eyes that had seen it all, listened patiently. Then he turned to Julia. She didn't make a counteroffer. She didn't argue legal theory. She simply stood up, opened her laptop, and connected it to the large monitor on the wall. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to play the body camera footage." She let the unblinking witness tell the story. As the video played, she would occasionally pause it. "Here, Judge," she'd say, pointing to the screen, "is the moment Captain Carter explains his legal duty as incident commander. And here is the moment Officer Riley ignores him. Here is Captain Carter making the correct tactical decision to go to a defensive attack to protect his firefighters. And here is Officer Riley forbidding it. And here, Judge," she said, her voice dropping to a somber tone, "is the roof collapsing and the fire spreading to the neighbor's building, while the officer who created this chaos stands and watches." When the footage was over, she placed the thick binder of Riley's deposition on the table with a heavy thud. "And this," she said, "is 7 hours of Officer Riley confirming under oath that his actions were motivated by ego, not evidence." Judge Wallace called for a lunch break. When they reconvened, he looked at Arthur Vance and the city's team with an expression of profound disappointment. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the federal bench, "I'm going to be blunt. You don't have a case. You have a catastrophe. I have seen the video. I have read excerpts from the deposition. If you let this go to a jury, they will not see a miscommunication. They will see a hero being arrested by a bully. They will see a man who runs into burning buildings being handcuffed by a man who, through his actions, effectively creates them. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Vance. Your liability here is not in the hundreds of thousands or even a million. It is well into the 8 figures. A jury will award Captain Carter compensatory damages for his false arrest and emotional distress. Then they will award him punitive damages to punish the city and Officer Riley personally. And that number will be astronomical. You need to understand the position you're in. You need to settle this case. Today. The negotiations went on for the rest of the afternoon. The city's number crept up. First to 5 million, then 10, then 15. Julia Hayes and Ben Carter never made a counteroffer. They had one condition that was non-negotiable and had nothing to do with money. We want a mandatory, top-to-bottom overhaul of the police department's training and policies regarding interaction with other first responders at emergency scenes, Julia stated. We want it drafted by a joint committee of fire and police command staff, and we want it court-enforced. Without that, there is no deal. Finally, as the sun began to set, the city capitulated completely. The final settlement was historic. The city of Northwood agreed to pay Captain Ben Carter $24.5 million. But for Carter, the most important part was the second page of the agreement, the one that guaranteed this could never happen again. The price of principle had been high, but the victory was absolute. The settlement was the end of the legal battle, but it was only the beginning of the institutional reckoning for the city of Northwood. A $24.5 million payout is a figure that no city council can ignore. It's a number that echoes through budget meetings for years, a number that demands accountability. And the first person in the line of fire was Officer Evan Riley. While the civil suit had been proceeding, the Northwood Police Department's Internal Affairs Division had been conducting its own parallel and notably slow investigation. The conclusion of the lawsuit and the public release of the body camera footage, a non-negotiable term of the settlement that Julia Hayes had insisted upon, forced their hand and stripped them of any ability to whitewash the incident. The Internal Affairs report, when finally released, was scathing. It was a complete repudiation of Riley's actions. It found that he had violated no fewer than 6 departmental policies: dereliction of duty, abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming of an officer, failure to follow the interagency cooperation protocol, as vague as it was, filing a false report by claiming Captain Carter had resisted arrest, and causing discredit to the department. The report concluded that Officer Riley's actions demonstrated a profound and dangerous lack of judgment and a fundamental misunderstanding of his role as a peace officer at a complex emergency scene. The recommendation was unequivocal: termination. The police chief, under immense pressure from the mayor's office, a furious city council, and an outraged public, had no choice but to concur. Evan Riley was summoned to headquarters and unceremoniously fired. He was stripped of his badge and his gun, a quiet, ignominious end to a career he had pursued with such misguided and destructive ambition. He left the station as a civilian, the authority he had so desperately craved and misused gone in an instant. The system he had tried to weaponize for his own ego had, in the end, consumed him. But firing one officer was not enough. The settlement demanded more. It demanded systemic change, and so began the difficult, often contentious process of forging a new relationship between the city's fire and police departments. The court-ordered joint committee was formed. It was co-chaired by Fire Chief Henderson and a new interim police chief, a reform-minded outsider named Isabella Rossetti, who had been brought in to clean up the mess. The committee included command staff from both sides, battalion chiefs, police captains, Union Presidents Mike Costello and his police counterpart, and veteran training officers. Ben Carter was asked to be a part of it. At first, he refused, wanting only to go back to his job and leave the politics behind. But Julia Hayes and Mike Costello convinced him that his presence was essential. He was the living embodiment of why the committee existed. His voice, calm and forged by experience, would carry more weight than anyone else's. The initial meetings were tense. Decades of cultural differences and ingrained tribalism separated the two departments. The cops saw the firefighters as glorified manual laborers who slept half their shifts. The firefighters saw the cops as adrenaline junkies who only knew how to escalate situations. But the shadow of the $24.5 million settlement hung over every discussion. Failure was not an option. Carter rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. He didn't talk about his arrest or his feelings. He talked about tactics, about safety, about the non-negotiable realities of a fire ground. When a structure is burning, he explained in one meeting, the only thing that matters is what the fire is doing and what it's going to do next. That is a science. It's not a matter of opinion. The incident commander is the only person on scene with the training and real-time information to make those life-or-death decisions. The police role is to support that mission. Secure the perimeter, control traffic, handle the public. It's a vital role, but it is a support role. The moment a police officer tries to assume tactical command, the entire operation fractures. And that's when people get hurt. Slowly, painstakingly, they hammered out a new set of protocols. The language was clear and unambiguous. It explicitly affirmed the fire department's incident commander as having supreme authority over all tactical operations within the established hot zone of a fire, hazmat incident, or complex rescue. It detailed the specific support roles of the police department, and most importantly, it created a new, mandatory 40-hour joint training program for all new recruits and a 16-hour refresher course for all veteran officers and firefighters. The firing of Dale Harding was a message. The forging of the new protocols was a promise. This would never happen again. Mark Gallo returned to his post at Station 27 3 months after the settlement was finalized. The welcome he received from his crew was quiet but profound. There were no grand speeches, just firm handshakes, slaps on the back, and the comfortable, unspoken camaraderie of men who had been through a battle together. Slipping back into the familiar rhythm of 24-hour shifts, the blare of the alarm, the routine of checking equipment was a balm to his soul. This was where he belonged. But the world outside the firehouse had changed. The settlement had made him a reluctant public figure. He was no longer just a fire captain. He was a symbol. His name was synonymous with the fight for the rights of first responders. He received letters and emails from firefighters and paramedics across the country, each sharing their own stories of police interference, of being bullied at scenes, of facing discipline for prioritizing patient care or firefighter safety over a police officer's demands. He realized the problem was far more widespread than he had ever imagined. His case was not an anomaly. It was simply the one that had been caught on camera and litigated to a stunning conclusion. After a long conversation with Evelyn Reed and Frank Costello, Gallo made a decision. He took a significant portion of his settlement, $5 million, and used it to establish the First Responders Legal Defense Fund. It was a national nonprofit organization with a simple mission: to provide legal resources and financial support to any firefighter, EMT, or paramedic facing legal challenges, retaliation, or disciplinary action for performing their duties correctly at an emergency scene. Evelyn Reed agreed to serve as the fund's chief counsel, assembling a network of pro bono attorneys across the country. Frank Costello, using his national union connections, spread the word. The fund became a beacon of hope for first responders who felt isolated and unprotected. It leveled the playing field, ensuring that a volunteer firefighter in rural Montana had the same access to top-tier legal representation as a union member in a major city. The fund's first case was on behalf of a paramedic in Texas who was being sued by a local sheriff's department for refusing to let deputies take a drunk driving suspect to jail before he could be medically cleared at a hospital. The paramedic had insisted the suspect's head injury from the crash required immediate evaluation. The fund provided an expert medical witness and a top-flight lawyer. The case was dismissed, and the sheriff's department was forced to issue a public apology. The fund had its first victory. Meanwhile, the policy changes in Clear Creek began to ripple outward. The new Joint Operations Protocol, meticulously crafted by the Fire Police Committee, became a model for other municipalities. Fire and police chiefs from other cities, spooked by Clear Creek's massive payout, began calling for copies of the new training curriculum. It became unofficially known as the Gallo Mandate. It wasn't a law, but it carried the weight of a $22.1 million legal precedent. The core tenets were simple. Affirm fire command authority on fire grounds, establish clear support roles for law enforcement, and mandate joint training to build cooperation. Cities from Seattle to Miami began adopting variations of the Gallo Mandate, rewriting their own policies to avoid a similar fate. The impact was tangible. A fire chief in Colorado used the Gallo Mandate to successfully push back against a state trooper who tried to order firefighters to move a ladder truck that was protecting a fatal accident scene on the highway. A paramedic crew in Florida cited the principles of the mandate when refusing to allow police to question a critically injured assault victim before they could stabilize him for transport. Mark Gallo never sought the spotlight. He turned down interview requests and speaking invitations. He preferred the anonymity of his helmet and turnout gear. But his legacy was being written not in headlines, but in the fine print of municipal policies and the quiet confidence of first responders across the nation. They knew that if they ever faced a choice between following their training and obeying a dangerous order, they were no longer alone. He hadn't just won a lawsuit, he had built a shield for his entire profession. Years passed. The scorched patch of earth on that quiet suburban street was now the site of a new house, indistinguishable from its neighbors. But the story of the fire and the arrest that followed did not disappear. Instead, it was codified and transformed into a permanent teaching tool. The body camera footage of the confrontation between Captain Gallo and Officer Harding became one of the most widely used training videos in public safety. At the Clear Creek Public Safety Academy, every new police recruit and probationary firefighter watched it on their first day of joint training. "Okay," an instructor would say, pausing the video, "what did the captain just explain to the officer?" They would analyze the breakdown in communication, the failure of one party to listen. "What just happened to the command structure of this fire scene?" the instructor would press. "It was decapitated," a recruit would answer. The lesson was stark, visual, and unforgettable. The case of Gallo versus City of Clear Creek became a legal touchstone, establishing a powerful precedent that the authority of an incident commander at a life-threatening emergency was a matter of established law. Mark Gallo eventually retired after 35 years of service. His true legacy wasn't the money. It was in the thousands of emergency scenes that unfolded differently because of what happened that day. It was in the police officer who now instinctively asks the fire captain, "How can we help, Cap?" instead of issuing orders. It was in the paramedic who confidently tells an officer, "This patient isn't stable enough for an interview," knowing the law is on their side. The legacy was prevention. The battle had been fought once, brutally, so that countless others would never have to be fought again. The story of Ben Carter and Evan Riley is a stark reminder that conflict often arises not from malice, but from a profound failure of perspective. What drove Officer Riley was likely not a desire to see a building burn down, but a dangerous cocktail of ambition, insecurity, and a cognitive bias known as professional tunnel vision. In his world, the most important thing was the criminal case he was building in his mind. He was so focused on the end, a potential arson conviction, that he became blind to the immediate life-threatening reality of the fire itself. His badge, which should have been a symbol of public trust, became a shield for his ego. He couldn't fathom a world where his authority wasn't absolute, where a different uniform carried a superseding duty in that specific environment. This mindset, the inability to see beyond one's own role in a larger, more complex event, is a quiet poison in any hierarchical system. We can ask ourselves, what if things had been different? What if Captain Carter, fearing for his career or simply seeking to avoid conflict, had complied? What if he had ordered his men to kill the lines? The warehouse would have collapsed sooner. The fire would have spread to the neighbor's building with even greater ferocity, and the lives of his firefighters, forced to stand by and watch, would have been put at an even greater risk from the uncontrolled blaze. Compliance would have been the easy path, but it would have been a path leading to certain disaster and an unforgivable dereliction of his duty. His defiance was not an act of ego. It was an act of profound responsibility. The lesson here transcends the uniforms. It is a lesson about the nature of true authority versus the performance of power. Riley performed power. Carter exercised authority, an authority born not from a badge, but from competence, experience, and an unwavering commitment to his primary mission. In any profession, in any life, we will all face moments where we are asked to compromise our core duties for the sake of someone else's agenda. This story teaches us that preparation, knowing your job, knowing your rights, and documenting your actions is the armor you wear into that conflict. The body camera that damned Riley could just as easily have exonerated him if his actions had been just. The objective truth is a powerful ally. This story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most courageous act is to professionally, calmly, and firmly say no. It is about the integrity of the mission being more important than the convenience of compliance. What did you take away from Captain Carter's decision? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between what was right and what you were told to do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps support the channel and allows us to continue telling these important stories.